Welcome to the Hey Docs podcast with your host, Jill Allen. This week, Felipe Lopez from Joe Architect is back. For those who don't know, he is a licensed architect who has been working with Joe Architect since 2012. He is now a project manager, guiding numerous clients through the process of designing and building their one-of-a-kind facilities across North America. And today we are diving into the ins and outs of ortho and multi-specialty practice build-outs. Felipe is a wealth of information and has some great tips for anyone looking to build a startup of their own. If you like what we're doing here on Hey Docs, don't forget to like, subscribe, and review our show so we can keep bringing you this awesome content. Let's give another warm welcome to Felipe Lopez. All right, everybody. I am so excited to have Felipe Lopez back on the Hey Docs podcast again. If you didn't catch our first episode, be sure and jump back and catch that. We just had really, really good nuggets of information on that first podcast. And so Felipe was great enough to say he would come and do this again with me. And, in case somebody out there doesn't know who you are, maybe doesn't know who the Joes are, can you, give us a little, introduction to what you do and the Joes? And then we're going to just dive right in. And I've got a bunch more questions for you.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name's Felipe Lopez. I'm one of the project managers, project architects at Joe Architect. We are a full services architectural and interior design firm, and we specialize designing really custom dental or ortho offices, just anything dental related. And we design it all across the nation. Doesn't matter where you're at. We've done a bunch of work in Canada. We've done work in Australia, Europe. So really doesn't matter where you're at. And we've been doing this for about 25 years. So it's been a while. So yeah, I'd love to help where we
great.
can. So yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. So I want to just kind of jump right in. On our last podcast, we talked a lot about design and, kind of how we, manage our budgets and, all of those different things. But I want to get a little bit more technical on this podcast and maybe a little bit broader on some of the questions that I'm going to ask. And, one question that I get asked a ton when I'm working with doctors that are doing startups, or because I work with a lot of docs that have been practicing for a while and maybe coming to me and saying, Jill, I'm at that 10-year mark. My lease is up. I think that now's the time for me to really design the practice of my dreams. I've got the money. I've got, I'm really ready to pour into my next, 10 years or so of practice. One of the big things I get asked a lot is, I've got these great relationships with equipment vendors, over the years. And I've heard, that, there are great architects out there as well. But can you kind of speak to maybe the differences in why somebody, whether they're a startup or they're looking to do the practice of their dreams per se, their second practice, why, there kind of that difference between using a full service architect versus using somebody like an equipment specialist?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really not uncommon where we have potential doctors reach out to us and say, hey, I've got this floor plan from the equipment specialist that designed it for me. What do you think? And those plans are fine. They're totally fine. Equipment vendors know how to lay out a floor plan, but their goals are different than an architect's goals would be with a layout, for example. So an architect, we're trained in not only being able to design, again, let's stick with floor plans, design an efficient and functional floor plan, because obviously, especially in the dental community, your practice needs an efficient flow for it to be successful. So that's almost a given. But The one thing that your architect's going to do, especially us, if you're working with us, we view floor plans and layouts a little differently. We're also looking at design opportunities while we're designing the floor plan. It's not just about, hey, how many chairs can we get in here? It's more about, okay, let's hit your goals with quantities and programmatic adjacencies and how big rooms are,
Yep.
but it's also design opportunities. Hey, if we angle a wall this way, the hallway that way, what can that do to the design once we actually start sculpting it three-dimensionally? All those things are happening early on. Your equipment specialist, they're trained in the equipment. That's what they do. And they're good at it, but that's
Yep.
what they do.
Yep.
Your architect and designer, they're trained to really help create a reality from your vision. So that's the big thing. That's what we're trained to do. And of course, follow all the necessary code requirements. Some of the vendors may or may not know how to do that stuff. Like door clearances, ADA accessibility clearances.
Yes.
Your architect will know how to do that, should know how to do that, I guess I should say. The other big thing, Jill, is once you have a full set of drawings, you need to submit to the city. And we touched this on the earlier podcast. Once you submit to the city, those drawings need to be stamped by a certified architect.
Yep.
So your equipment vendor cannot do that unless they also happen to be an architect.
Yep. Yep.
So that's something to consider. The other thing too is that your architect knows how to communicate with the engineers that you're going to need.
Yep.
Yeah, like mechanical, plumbing, electrical. They're going to have a better idea of construction, constructability. They're involved through construction. And so your architect just has a greater amount of knowledge when it comes to, we call it design and engineering, but it also includes construction. These are things that your vendor, even if they've been doing it for 50 years plus, they might be
Yep.
okay at it, but that's not what they're trained to do. But the reality is, in these projects, you need to work with both. So if you're just working with an architect, that's great, but you're also going to need to work with an equipment vendor.
Absolutely.
Like this is all we do, dental, right? But equipment's changing every day, and they're getting more digital. The requirements are different. There's new equipment being brought to the table. Your vendor is going to know what those things are, what's best suited for you and your practice. And so again, it's a team approach. You should be working with a vendor, but you should definitely also be working with an architect.
Yeah, that's great. And that's something I really talk to my docs a lot about as well is, we definitely need our equipment specialists out there because there is a component, I always say like we kind of have these layers to our plans, right? We design it or the architectural component, and then we have to lay over where the equipment specs and, the equipment, component and the IT component and then the mechanical and all of that plays into this full set of drawings. So we definitely need those equipment specialists, but a lot of times I have found that and this isn't a dig against our equipment specialists by any means. It's more just that if you are saying, hey, why should I use an architect versus an equipment specialist, you're going to get more of a well-rounded start to finish approach using an architect and probably not have to, I would think, be as involved in trying to get all of the right people in at the right time.
Absolutely.
So I have been asked a lot lately about designing for multi-specialty practices. And, I definitely think we've got a movement in our industry where we're seeing, docs that are coming and saying, I don't just want to design for one specialty, and we see this really nice marriage between ortho and pedo or dental with pedo and surgery or, all the different configurations,
Yeah.
that are out there. How do you guys work with that? And and if you can kind of talk a little bit to doctors who may be thinking about that, and let's say maybe it's the orthodontic component and then some type of a dental specialty.
Yeah.
Can you kind of speak to that and some of the things that we need to be thinking about? I know what I think about when I'm working like with my pedo ortho practices, but I know you work on the dental side, you work in the surgery side as well. So can you just kind of open our eyes a little bit to some of the basic things that if you're a doctor out there thinking, I think I'm going to dabble in, I think I'm ready to, to go all in a dual or multi-specialty practice. Can you
Yeah.
talk to that?
And you're right. We are seeing kind of an influx of doctors wanting to partner up with other doctors, other specialties, to create, a more well-rounded practice that can service more of
Yeah.
the community, just different specialties. So absolutely. I would have to say as well, I think pedo ortho is probably the bigger one.
Mhm.
We're I'm seeing quite a big of influx of those two specialties
Yep.
really kind of combining and lending themselves to working together. Now, the big thing that you're going to want to let your architect know is, okay, so let's say you're an orthodontist and you're looking at whatever kind of specialty add-on. Let's just say it's pediatric. If you don't have that pediatric dentist on board who's going to be a part of this process, let your architect know, because as an orthodontist, ortho, that's fantastic, but you might have no idea what's involved with how to practice as a pediatric dentist.
Yes.
And by that, I mean more like the equipment, right? The delivery system. So, ortho, you're using a side cart, ortho cart, right? Pediatric, they've got 12 o'clock deliveries, chair mounted
Yep.
deliveries, things of that nature. If you're not working with a pediatric dentist, like I said, but it's just your goal to open up an ortho pedo practice, that's where having a dental vendor on board is going to be critical, because they'll let you know what equipment, so what equipment can do both for both specialties. So, let's say an open bay, you've got chairs in there. There's certain chairs, dental chairs, that both ortho and pediatric dentists can use. But there are also some that you can't. Like if you get that chair, it's only one specialty and that's it. No one else can use it. So having that flexibility, talking to your architect and dental vendor, figure out what kind of equipment you need. That's going to be important. The other thing to note is, depending on the specialty that you bring on board, it's going to dictate how many chairs you have in your space.
Yes.
So we're normally seeing these multi-specialties in larger footprints, like larger projects, 2,000 square foot plus. It's very challenging to do this in smaller spaces because, again, in my mind, ortho has the most flexibility with square footage because of the open bay. Now, you go to general dental, you do oral surgery, you do endo, those are all enclosed rooms. So all those rooms need to be a certain size per code.
Yep. Yep.
Um, I'm not going to bore you with all the clearance requirements, but
Sure.
you can't make these rooms super tiny. They have to be a certain size for them to be functional, and just per code. And so that's going to limit the amount of chairs that you can have. So that's going to be important for you as a doctor to figure out, okay, well, how many chairs do I want in my practice?
Yep.
If I'm doing multidisciplinary, multi-specialty, how many chairs does it make sense? Am I practicing there every day? Because that might be another thing. Maybe you're Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and that other doctor's Tuesday, Thursday. And so
Mhm.
that's okay. But maybe you're like, oh no, I'm still working 5 days a week. If that other doctor's working 5 days a week, what does that look like? So those are all things that you definitely want to keep an eye out for. So the big ones, just to reiterate, equipment, what equipment you should be getting, and then the program, right? So oral surgery, hey, do we need to have an area where people are recovering, a recovery area? No other specialty really needs that or has that.
Yep.
So all of a sudden now you have a room with sofas and things like that. or maybe it's just your quiet room and they're just recovering in the chair. There's different approaches, but you just want to make sure that you're having these conversations and really dialing in what your goals are, um, before you start working on floor plans and things like that.
Yeah, and I think, that's something I talk to my docs about all the time is we don't want to just kind of haphazardly throw stuff into our practice because number one, there's a huge cost effect to it as well. But as we had said in our other podcast, to go back and retrofit something can also be extremely difficult. And so I think, just really having these good discussions, putting it out all out on the table. The other thing that I see a lot too is I have some of my docs that are saying, we don't necessarily want to share the whole practice. We want to share certain components of the practice. So it's almost like one practice, two practices in one space. And
Yep.
I know that you can speak to this a little bit. I know what I've seen a lot is shared sterilization areas, maybe shared break rooms, maybe some of the quiet rooms. Can you kind of just talk to, maybe some of that design component too?
Absolutely. Those projects, um, they're going to be very site specific. So
Mhm.
there's only, I mean, depending on the shape and the size of your suite, you may or may not be able to do what you're describing here, like two
Yep.
practices with common areas.
Yep.
But for the practices that are looking for that, you're totally right, Jill. Shared spaces, sterilization's a big one. Another big one could be lab, if they're doing lab work.
Mhm.
Imaging sometimes is a big one too. I mean, everyone knows those X-rays cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if they're able to have one imaging area, if it makes sense, because again, you got to think flow. You got two
Yep.
practices. You don't want someone, your staff, your hygienist, your whoever, having to travel from one side of the office and it takes them 10 minutes to get
Yep.
to the sterilization that's elsewhere or the imaging that's elsewhere. So there's a balance there, and so your architect should be able to help you out with that if that's the goal, to kind of bring these two offices together with some shared space. But there's definitely value in there because if you only need one sterilization, one imaging, one break room, then you can probably have more treatment rooms and
Yeah.
more chairs, which
Yeah.
is doctors are wanting. So
Yep. And I think and I think that's the beauty of, working with people who specialize in this area is you don't have to as doctors, you don't have to know it all. And I think it's okay to be vulnerable a little bit and say this is my vision or this is my other doc that I'm going to be working with, this is our vision, but we don't really know the best way to put this together. So I love, Felipe, when you said like come and put it all out there what you're looking for and then lean on the experts to be able to kind of help you figure out the best way that practice is going to work because it is very contingent upon the footprint of the space that we're getting.
it's a complex build out, like, and it starts with the layout. And so having your architect, even you, Jill, I mean, you know these layouts, you know how they work, you know what works, what doesn't, just as well as we do. But having a good dental vendor on board, having that
Yep.
team up front and a good team that can communicate with one another. They're not like, hey, this is my work, this is your work, don't butt in. None of that. Like as long as everyone's collaborating, then it's fantastic. And then because you guys are gonna bring things to the table that us as architects might not know, and vice versa. And so as long as you've got a good team behind you, then that's where these kind of projects can be really successful.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about budget because I think that's something that always comes up when I have a doc that that comes to me or docs that come to me and say, "Hey, we're going to do a multi-specialty practice." What are some of the things that just affect that budget in dual specialty versus single specialty? Or I mean, obviously, more specialties probably more cost, but I would also assume there's kind of some fixed things that once they're in, they're in.
Yeah, so I would say probably one of the biggest things would have to be your med gas. So as
Yeah.
ortho, for example, you guys don't need med gas. You don't need nitrous and oxygen. But if you're general dental, maybe you do. If you're pediatric, probably. If you're oral surgery, I hope so.
Yeah, exactly,
But
exactly.
but there's a huge cost to that, especially depending on where you're at. You have to build a fire rated closet, a 1 hour rated closet. The door has to be rated. You've got all these venting requirements, but you also have all this medical gas components that you need to buy, the alarm, the manifold, all the tubing, all that stuff adds up real quick. I mean, it
Mhm.
could be anywhere from 20 to 40 grand, easy. And if you don't know if you need it, but let's say you're an orthodontist and you're like, well, I want to have a pediatric dentist in here. Uh, I'm going to go ahead and do this med gas closet. Just know that's great because the pediatric dentist is probably going to really appreciate that over having just, mobile tanks.
Yep.
But there's a cost. And so you need to be prepared for things like that. The other big one is, again, your x ray in your imaging room. So some pediatric dentists, general dentists, they might be fine with just a pan, right? Just a smaller 2D
Mhm.
x-ray imaging unit, and that's fine. But let's say ortho, they typically like to do 3D. So you got to have a Ceph arm on there. It means that the imaging equipment is that much larger. So you want to plan for that because
Yep.
once you get that imaging room in place, it's probably going to be impossible. Nothing's impossible. It's going to be very difficult to retrofit that to fit a bigger unit after the fact. So those are things that you're going to be wanting to kind of consider too when you go multidisciplinary.
Yeah. And I just want to talk just a little bit, just because it kind of sparked my interest a little bit, when we're talking about X-ray, because the other thing that I see in the dental side of it is, they also want PAs and bite wings and all those different things. And we have to really think about that. Are we gonna put tube heads on the wall? Or are we going to have a roaming x-ray machine? Like, what are, I think those are all things that we have to really consider too, because again, in ortho, we usually just want one general picture and we're good to go. So can you talk just a little bit even about that component of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it goes back to equipment, right? Dental equipment.
Hmm.
And just being educated on what most doctors are using, depending on what specialty you're talking about. Even if you go into certain treatment rooms, quiet rooms, what have you, depending on your specialty, doctors are still going to want specific delivery systems, whether it's chair mounted, rear delivery, what have you. Maybe they want x-rays up on the walls. You have to figure out how far do you want to take this, especially unless that doctor's on board. Like if you have all the doctors on board, that makes life easier because then everyone can kind of tell you what they want, how they practice. It makes life easier. But
Yes.
a lot of doctors, when they're looking at these kind of practices, they're looking at an associate, adding an associate. They don't know who that person is yet. So that's where things get a little trickier. So there's no right or wrong answer here. It just depends on how far you want to take it. And again, lean on your architect and your vendor to let you know, like, okay, maybe let's just talk about a wall mounted x-ray, like a tube head, right? Um, okay, vendors like, yeah, 90% of the specialists, this kind of specialty, use that. Plan for it now. I mean, don't get the tube head, right? Maybe they don't need it, but it's not that much more money to plan for the in-wall blocking. So like the wood framing in there to
Hmm.
hold that piece of equipment up, plan for the electrical all now. If you end up not using it, okay, maybe you spend a few $100s to get them to install that stuff, but it's going to cost way more if you don't. And then that
Yep.
associate comes in and is like, I really need this tube head here or whatever piece of equipment.
Yep.
So again, that's going to be the challenge if you're doing this on your own and bringing a future associate on board. But just flexibility. And again, ask your vendor, ask your consultant, ask your architect, what are you guys seeing? What should I plan for? Um, and then just, plan accordingly.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, just to bring it back to budget, you just have to know that it's going to cost more when
Yeah.
we're building out a space, whether you've got a doc that's there with you, and each of you are coming to the table with your own loans or your own budget in this, or you're going to shoulder this yourself for the future of what you're going to be doing in your practice. It is just naturally going to be more. And right now, just to do an orthodontic startup, we're doing loans anywhere between 6 and 700,000, to kind of do an all-in build out. If we're adding a specialty onto that, there could easily maybe be another 100,000 that we're adding in, just to make sure that we've got the back end component of what we need in the practice. So
Yeah, there's definitely a financial component here. You're right. There's more complexities here, but the end goal is that, again, it'll cost more upfront, but then you're seeing different types of patients. You might be getting in-house referrals. Maybe you're seeing way more patients now because of this. So you just have to figure out whether or not this is worth it for you, and whether or not the space that you're looking at is conducive to doing this. Because if you have a small space, like I said, and you're thinking about adding another specialty, but you're just going to give them one room.
yeah.
And some doctors do that. And maybe that's worth it,
Yep.
but
Especially if maybe we're just building out a surgical suite, I mean, that
exactly.
that
And
could be really easy.
things like that could work. But usually when doctors are doing that, they have a clear understanding of like, oh yeah, that associate's only here on Tuesdays or whatever it is.
Yep.
And they only need that room. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So I want to ask a little bit about, since we're kind of talking bigger picture here, what about docs that are saying, I'm not going to build out a space, but I'm actually going to do single or multi-specialty. I'm going to do kind of a ground up build. I want to just talk a little bit about that process,
Yeah.
because we both know it's a longer process, but I think there's so many factors that go into, beyond just I bought land and now I'm ready to to buy a building. And can you take us through like kind of the top level things? If a doc were calling in and said, Felipe, I bought land, I want to do a practice. Like, kind of what are things that they
What does
need to
that
be
what does that
thinking
look
about?
like? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So you're absolutely right. This process of a ground up, and again, everyone, a ground up is you buy land, there's nothing on there. There's no building, there's no infrastructure, nothing. So it's a much larger project than a tenant improvement, which means the building's in and you're just designing a suite within the existing building. So with the ground up, um, you have to understand the budget. Your budget needs to be higher because you're
for
not just
sure.
building the suite, you're building an entire building. And a lot of times it's not just the building, you're building roads, sidewalks, parking lot, lighting, exterior, landscape, all those things you need to
Yes.
consider. The timeline's much longer. So with a tenant improvement, again, it depends on where you're at. It's way shorter. You can get things done under a year. Ground up, I'd say probably if you're able to get something done in 18 months, all the stars align for you. Because
Yeah, I
we're
usually
finding it
say
just,
plan a good 2 years.
yeah,
Two,
two
2 years.
years is just kind of what it takes. And again, you need for a ground up, it's a much larger endeavor. You need to have a really good team going in. In the last podcast, we talked about competitive bid, negotiated bid. That's when you bring either
Yep.
3 contractors to price it or you're working with one. I could not recommend more doing a negotiated bid with a ground
Agreed.
up. You need
Agreed
to
with
have
you
a
100%.
contractor on board from day one And the reason why that's going to be valuable is because they can price things along the way. So they don't just price it. Everyone's got their drawings done. We've designed a beautiful building. Everything's looking great. And then then you get the cost for it. And we're not talking like, oh, it's 50 grand higher. If with a ground up, it could be like $400,000.
Hundreds of thousands of
Yeah. And
dollars
it's
more.
like,
Yep.
well, I can't, how do you cut $400,000 out of a project? It's,
Right.
yeah, well, you used to have a second floor. We need to get rid of it. But to do that after everything's been designed and drawn, it's going to take way more time. And then you're going to have to pay people to redo things. And that's what we're looking at avoiding. When you bring a contractor on from day one, you get number of rounds of what we call preliminary pricing. That way everyone's able to have at least a pulse on, hey, what is this coming in at? Because early on, if it turns out, hey, we're already over budget, okay, it's early on. Let's figure out how do we cut costs.
Yep.
Maybe you don't have that second story. Maybe you wanted a basement or a crawl space. Maybe now it's slab on grade. Maybe it's just a concrete floor now. Things like that. Maybe your overall footprint needs to get smaller. All those things will directly impact your overall construction cost.
Yeah.
So those are things that you definitely need to keep an eye out. But I'd say that you really want to make sure you're working with a qualified architect because, again, there's a lot more moving parts. You will have a structural engineer involved, civil engineer. Again, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, those are normal. But it's just a much larger project. So I highly encourage you working with with architects that have done this before, know what they're doing. But we actually get a lot of calls, Jill, for doctors who are looking at doing a ground up, but they don't necessarily, because our firm, we only do ground ups if it's like in Colorado or the neighboring states. Like we wouldn't do one in California.
Yep.
Or Florida or things like that. But what a lot of doctors end up doing, and this is okay too, you
Yep.
hire a local team, a local architect that maybe they just specialize in what we call shell design. So their day to day is designing exterior shells of buildings and developing, the streets, the parking lot. That's what they do. And they're great at doing that, but
Yep.
they don't know anything about dental, like not even short of going to the dentist, they have no idea what a floor plan would look like. Our firm we are totally okay working with the shell architect. They figure out the exterior and we fully design the interior. We have to collaborate, of course, and everyone's got to be on the same page. But that's a good approach if you're looking at hiring a dental specific architect to help you with the interior, but you don't necessarily need them to do the actual building.
Yeah. And I think I think that's a pearl right there. And I hope somebody really, hears that, because I think it can be hard. You can feel very like, well, how do I find this one person that does it all? And I think this is where we can have two really great teams,
Yeah.
working together. And actually, it's probably going to be three, because you could have that shell component. And then we've got, your interior dental design architect. And then, we've just got, all those pieces working really well together, like our contractor that, is going to be on board from the very beginning with this, or whatnot. And so I think, if we can kind of get all of those three specialties working together, again, the goal is to have this project go off really nicely. But also everybody is aware of budget and everybody is working for the same goal instead of almost competing with each other as we're working.
And that's going to be something important for you as the doctor to realize. Because again, once you do a ground up with the exterior portion of the building, you clad it with one material that can look great. All of a sudden, your building got exponentially more expensive, or you add an angle on it and all of a sudden the structure component's way more expensive. So it's managing expectations and what your ultimate goal is. So I normally tell doctors, okay, what's more important for you? Are you really trying to create this sculpture, this like really defined architectural piece as an exterior, like the building? Do you want
Hmm.
that to be the statement?
Hmm.
And it's okay if you do, but just know that's going to cost a lot of money. Most of your budget is going to be spent doing that. Or do you want still a very nice building, but maybe it's a little bit more simple, still very nice, but just simpler. But on the interior,
That's
is that where you want to make the statement? In my personal opinion, for doctors, it would make more sense to spend more money or more of the design money on the interior because that's where patients are actually
yes.
experiencing the
Yes.
environment. And I think you're doing this for them. So, as much as I'm an architect, I love beautiful buildings and what they can look like and what they can be. But I also know that as soon as you start doing more complex buildings, they cost way more. And
Yep.
so you can have a beautiful sculpture and then a very, very basic interior. That's okay too, if that's what you want. Or if you're just filthy rich, you can do both,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's about managing expectations, right?
Yeah.
So I'd like to say 9 out of 10 doctors that I talk to, they're more of that approach of, oh, no, 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 I want a nice building. It doesn't need to be complicated though. I really want the focus to be on the interior. I want that to be the wow factor.
Yeah, I love that. And I think really, really great advice. And I think this uh, really has helped kind of break down, for docs who may be thinking about this. Okay, that I can kind of see how this can all work together. And I love the idea of thinking about where do you want to put your flair in the building or on the interior. And I agree with you. I think most of us are there to have that essence of your practice be shown throughout the practice. Building is great, and it could be, like you said, it could be where you want to do it. But I think most of the time, I think most docs want that to come across within that interior design.
Yeah.
So as we kind of finish up, and this has just been, again, great information. Thank you so much for being on the podcast again.
Oh,
If you could kind of just point out, we've both been doing this a long time and we see where practices are going. If you were to say like three design things that you're seeing, and maybe three is too many, but of what you're seeing the practice of the future looks like, either in space or unique design elements, maybe some trends that we're seeing from the way we're doing consult rooms to different things. What would you say right now, 2022, maybe what we're kind of planning for right now?
yeah. I'd say one of the big components that I'm seeing has to do with offices being more digital. So I'd say that's a big one.
Yeah.
Everything from, lab equipment before, hey, we've got a sink, we need a model trimmer so it can drain into the sink, to now like, oh, I don't do any of that. I've got my 3D printers. Like I don't need to do any of that.
Yep.
I mean, that's just one small example of how even equipment's getting more digital and spaces don't necessarily need to be as big. You
Hmm.
touched on it, Jill. The consult rooms, those are always changing.
Oh, for sure. For
So, but
sure.
what I've definitely noticed is that okay, so just say like 10 years ago, right? More doctors were interested in having a dental chair in there, like a full blown dental chair.
Yep.
Even if they're not providing treatment, they're like, oh, but I need the dental chair there, of course. Nowadays, it's more like, oh no, I don't want to have any dental equipment in there.
Nope.
I want this consult room to be welcoming. I want it to seem almost like a living room,
Yep.
almost kind of like the space behind you, Jill, like
Yep.
chairs, art. A lot of doctors are like, I don't even want to have a peninsula desk. I don't want this interaction to be me on this side, you on the other side. I want it to be more, hey, we're a family here. We're
Yep.
friends. So
Hmm.
we're seeing it could be as simple as, hey, I want a round table
Yep.
in my consult room because I don't want there to be us here, you there approach. So there's a trend definitely that I'm seeing there. To go back to the digital world, though, like waiting rooms, for example, and reception areas, this term concierge, that's like the trendiest thing that I'm hearing nowadays. I don't want a traditional reception desk. I don't want this L-shaped thing, check in, check out. I mean, we still have a lot of docs that
Mhm.
do want that, and it still makes a lot of sense. And we make beautiful, I mean, your architect can design beautiful desks that, are still really open and everything. But what we're seeing now is more of a trend of these doctors wanting this kind of hotel atmosphere where it's more about this small kind of podium or, you know, taller, kind of smaller footprint of a desk where it's really about someone greeting you.
Mhm.
Hey, can I get you something to drink? Did you check in already? Again, most people already check in because it's all digital now.
Yep.
But if they haven't, handing them an iPad or something like that. I'm not seeing clipboards anymore.
No, no, because we don't have paper in the office anymore. We better not.
Exactly. So
If-
so things like that. So it's more about creating this kind of hotel, just
Yeah,
concierge,
yeah.
more of an inviting space. Like here, just relax while we come get you, as opposed to here's your number, sit down, and we'll call it when you're good to go. So I mean, that's a trend that we're definitely seeing as well.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I think, even just pointing out those three things, those are the exact same things I'm seeing. Our consult rooms are more presentation rooms. Our front desks are more of that concierge welcoming. We've outsourced a lot of positions now, so we aren't building all these extra offices and offices.
There
Um,
is one more thing that I just thought of.
oh,
I don't know how I
yes.
forgot about this. The social media wall.
Mm. Oh,
So
for sure.
yeah, this in the last few years has blown up where doctors are like, wait, where's my wall where everyone's going to take their photos, their smile reveal photos, or
Yep.
hey, I just came from the dentist and whatever it is. That's huge now. Doctors are like,
Yes.
I need a social media wall. And that could be anything. It could be, I mean, I don't suggest just putting your logo back there and that's it, because that person's going to cover it. It's also not important because if you're blasting it on social media, they're going to know who it's coming from. But more doctors are leaning more towards like, let's have that be decorative. I want that to be
Hmm.
a design piece. I want it to have like interesting lighting. I just want it to be fun,
Recognizable. Yeah. Yeah.
recognizable. I want it to be part of my brand. And I also want everyone in the waiting room to see it because I want people to be excited about it.
Yep.
So, and maybe not just the waiting room, but like they want a lot of the patients to like
Yeah.
be visible while this is happening. So that's definitely a trend that we've been seeing too.
Yeah. I love it. Well, again, such amazing information from you. And I just can't thank you enough for once again doing another podcast and just giving our audience great information. I know people took probably a ton of notes today as we were going through our little talk back and forth. So as we finish up, once again, I've got a speed round for you. I promise not to ask the same
Favorite.
same questions. That's right. That's right. So are you ready for the challenge?
Let's do it.
All right. So coffee or tea?
Coffee, 100%.
Yes. I'm like, just put it in the vein. It's good.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
do you have a favorite book?
I do. The Martian, they made a movie out of it too, but it's the only book I ever recall reading where I literally laughed out loud on parts. Like,
That's great. That's
yeah.
great.
So,
How
yeah.
about favorite outdoor activity?
Well, there's a lot of them. I mean, right now it's running. We talked about running
Yep.
before.
Yep.
So, but really doing anything, hiking, camping, getting out on the lake, paddleboard, kayaking, love all of it.
Well, and how can we not? We both live in Colorado, and
We
I
have to
think
take
I think
advantage
that's
of it. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, that's it, right where I live too, pretty much my whole life. So, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
Wow, that's a hard one.
I know it's kind of deep.
I think it's probably that I was there, that I was supportive when I needed to be, um, that people could count on me, uh,
Yeah.
that I was just a presence,
Yeah.
that
That's
people
great.
could just rely on me being there for them. So
Yeah. Oh, I love that. All right. And our final one. If you could give somebody a piece of advice, your best, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
I'd have to say it's, especially nowadays with social media and everything, it's comparison is the thief of joy. Like, do just stop comparing your life and what you don't have with everyone else, because your life is
Yes.
going to be different than everyone else's.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
just value what you do have, because that's way more important than the things that you don't. And again, in this age of Instagram and TikTok and seeing what everyone's going on vacations and the jobs that they have and all that stuff, eh, everyone's comparing. Like that's,
Yep.
even with doctors, it's, oh, I saw this office that was designed and that office. And it's even in your guys' world from
Oh,
even
for
just
sure.
like a design standpoint. And I do feel like comparing does create a lot of, I don't know, steals the joy out of life a lot of
Yeah.
times.
Ah,
Just
I
focus on yourself, I'd say, and stop comparing your life to everyone else's.
Yeah, great, great advice. I love that. Well, again, thank you so much. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you or get talk to the Joes, can you leave us with a little bit of information there?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way to get a hold of us is just go online, just Google Joe Architect. Our website's joearchitect.com. And then just find us on there. Our numbers are on there. I'd give you my phone number, but no one's going to remember that. You can also follow us on Instagram. All of our
Perfect.
info is on there too. So it's just at Joe Architect Studio. And then you can follow us. We're always posting progress photos and just updates on the firm and yeah, good
Great.
material. So you guys can reach us there.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for being a part of Hey Docs. And
Yeah.
until next time.
Yes, this was great. Thanks, Jill.
Absolutely. See ya.